What would that be?
So I'll conclude the course just by talking about the end point, which is cropping and harvesting. And it's a bit much for people when they're first beginning to think you've got to do all those efforts all the way along the way. And then for me to tell you that actually harvesting and cropping is yet another skill, and you do actually need to know what you're doing. There's kind of judgments to make. So for instance, if I'm picking the salad, I'll pick the youngest, most succulent part of the plant. And yeah, if you can imagine a kale plant, so it's a cabbage plant, and it's got large leaves that have come through the winter, and then a new shoot in the middle, which is actually the most succulent part. And very often you see people, actually down the Huerta we had a case where somebody was picking off the big old leaves from the kale, and they're the ones that are going to provide energy to the new young succulent shoots. So you should actually pick the central head out first, and then the large leaves left, they can still supply energy to side shoots which develop because you've taken the main leading shoot away, and then you get a second crop of young succulent shoots from the same plant, and they can carry on all the way up to, like the mustards, they'll then go to flower and you can eat the flowers. So you can get 2 or 3 crops from one plant. But yeah, instructions when I send people out collecting salads, at the moment a lot of it's broadcast. So I've got a whole patch just of rocket, just of Greek cress, and I can just grab a bit that looks nice, gather a few plants up at the top, cut through halfway, leaving the plants in the growing point in the ground to regrow and give a second crop later, but taking off all the nice young succulent stuff off the top, and making sure that I don't pick any dead leaves that might get in the salad. And then afterwards, yeah, for washing salad, you don't kind of mash it around in the sink and damage it and bruise it. You have to get the water in as gently as possible, and then the process is actually lifting the salad up through the water, and the dirt drops into the water, and you lift the salad up out of the water, and then you can rinse it again. And most of the salads, yeah, most of the time that I've brought along here, I'll have washed 2 or 3 times. First time I might wash just in the water butts that I've got for watering on the allotments, just to get slugs and big bits of mud off. But then I'll make sure that I wash them in tap water before you lot get to eat them. So it's not quite as simple as we might think, because, yeah, if I provide something that's supposed to be a salad and it's actually a slug salad, or there's bits of mud, or there might be pathogens on it as well, then, yeah, a big point to remember when you're showing your friends and your mates is aversion. That very often you can present them with your bowl of salad and you think it's the best thing in the world, and they will find the slug, and they might even eat the slug or the bit of mud, and then they'll never eat a salad ever again in their lives, that kind of thing. And that's the same as I've been saying with pest and diseases, like peas, if they're grown in good soil and kept moist, especially at the crucial time when they're flowering and just about to set pods, when they need moist soil and draw up enough nutrients to swell the pod up. But if you've grown them in rough, tough soil and they haven't had enough water at that point, then you will get pea bean moth, which means you'll get a maggot in the peas. And when the kids pop open the peas and open them up, they'll go, "Ugh, I'm not eating that." And yeah, I've had other stories this week. And a related project to the one I do at Darnell, there's a family support centre, and they've got a group of, let's say, problem youths. Let's not go any further, but teenage kids. And there's a guy who's got a contract to grow stuff with them, and they, after a bit of persuasion, went along and helped him do the growing. And they've grown some courgettes, but then the kids won't bloody touch the courgettes. They say, "I'm not eating that, it's been grown in muck. Mm-hmm. And if it's not come from a supermarket and got package on and perfectly clean, I'm not touching that." Mm-hmm. So that's not just aversion, that is a status prejudice, that those kids have been brought up on packaged, frozen, microwave food all their lives, and they think it's a climb down to eat something that's been grown in natural conditions in real soil. So we're all dealing with these kind of ingrained challenges and prejudices in society. If people have overcome those already, like if their granny picked them some peas and they remember that, or some memory from the past that's positive, you can pick up on that. Or if they started growing a little bit themselves and they're kind of converts because they can see the point, those are the people that kind of I want to work with, because I don't want to spend my life just trying to get kids to eat food they don't want to eat. So think about that. I'll just summarise these last couple of leaflets. The one about season extension, again, that's the process of trying to build up, so you're not just growing in the warm growing season, but you're thinking about supplying yourself all year round. And back to Lawrence Hill's ironically titled "What You Could Be Eating If Only You'd Sown It at the Right Time." So try and think about sowing stuff now that's going to, some of it be ready in a month or two, some of it main crops ready in the summer and the autumn, and then some things could grow all the way through into the winter or through to next spring. And if you can as well, get more perennials in, fruit, and try and think really long term. Trying to go for filling every gap, not just in the year, but like I say, imagining that you're going to carry on growing for the rest of your life. The recommendation in terms of different crops, like, did you ask about mustards? When's the best time to sow mustards? So the red mustard that we had great big leaves off last week, and this week we've just got little leaves. The little leaves were just sown a month ago, and that was just to cover up a patch of ground before another crop and tame the ground and green manure it. But now we've got an edible green manure. Compared to the ones with great big long leaves, they'd overwintered in a polytunnel with protection from July and August. So that category of crops like pak choys and the red mustards, if you can start them off as the days are starting to get shorter at the end of the summer, so that's August onwards, then they're growing into cooler conditions, and rather than bolting and going to flower like they will do in the spring, they'll instead hold and form more leaf, which is their way of getting through the winter and having a store of energy to go to flower the next year, so they turn into a biennial. So yeah, the first time you grow that, if you've got some this evening, you can just sow it. In a month you'll be able to eat them, but then in 2 months they'll have gone to flower, and you either save the seed or that's the end of that crop. But so you could sow it regularly, successionally, several times, a couple of weeks apart, if you want to keep your supply going throughout the summer. But if you grow it through its life cycle once, or you understand that difference between autumn sown and spring sown, that things bolt in the spring, then you can start to manipulate the way you use that crop. But that's just one crop, and we've talked about hundreds of different crops. So the more experience you can get from other people who have tried these things or give you tricks about when to grow a particular thing, the better. And also, I've mentioned throughout the course, so it's a recap, that one of the challenges is rather than taking your established diet and trying to grow what you eat bought from the supermarket or wherever, be open to changing your diet. And I think everyone here has been open to trying the new things and explored and found some lovely things that they might carry on and make friends with. And similar to the herbs, it is that kind of sense of a relationship with plants. Like the Greek cress and the rocket, nothing special, but if you can grow them, then that's your basis for a salad, and potentially you could carry on growing that throughout the year and for the rest of your life, and never need to grow lettuce again or buy one from the shops, that kind of thing. But another point here is that rather than extending the cropping season throughout the year, like for strawberries or parsnips on the other hand, where there will be strawberries in the supermarkets throughout the autumn and the winter and the spring. They won't taste of anything, of course, because they come from Spain and they're grown purely to look good on the shelf, not to taste good. I actually reject strawberries now, except, and I wait, and I anticipate when mine will actually be fully ripe and proper, true strawberries. You know, if somebody else has grown some, I'll try some. But generally, wouldn't eat them. Same with parsnips, that in the middle of the winter, when it's really cold, and you want to bulk up with stodge, that's the perfect time for parsnips, because they've got extra sugars in, especially after the frosts. That converts the starches into sugar, and they taste sweeter. And it's the right thing at the right time of year. But again, in the supermarkets, they import parsnips from Australia in the middle of June and July. Who wants to eat a parsnip in the middle of July? Anyway, so that out of season, the over-convenience of those kind of things. And then, rather than trying to eke out and have strawberries every week of the year, well, I've got early ones that will come on early, especially in the polytunnel. So they'll be 6 weeks earlier than the main crop. That'll be start of June. And then I've got repeat flowering ones, which will flower a bit, have a few fruits, and then they'll come back and flower again a bit later. So by planting different varieties, I can get 3 or 4 months when strawberries are available, including the alpine strawberry and the wild strawberry, which only have titchy ones, but again extend the season a bit longer. And my point is that I will then overindulge in strawberries and eat huge, great bowls full if they're available. And that's a sense of what we would have done throughout history, which is overindulge and have a glut of something at a certain time, but then not need it the rest of the year. And my proposition is that with certain things, your body can actually store nutrients, certain vitamins especially, for months on end. Let's ask Asha, is that vaguely true?
Yeah, some of them you can't work with.
Can you give us the one that you can do that with?
Vitamin D, for instance.
Right.
Vitamin D you store for a certain length of time.
Yeah.
And the fat-soluble ones.
So my proposition is that, you can get an overdose of some of these things, and they'll carry over for several months after that. You won't actually need, physically, your body will have been supplied with enough of a certain vitamin to get by even without. If we've got that approach of being open to eating what we succeed in growing, and we're not dictating to nature and trying to force it to be the way we want, especially if we're based on what we've seen at the supermarket. That's the idea. And a few little methods here. I've mentioned kales, and they'd grow from 1 year and crop the next. But it's a point with all biennials, if you stop them going to flower, they'll carry on living for a third year. So if you take all the flowers off a kale, don't let it go to seed, your kale will carry on and live for a third year and be a triennial. And same is true of things like any biennial, like fennel or celery. You could actually manipulate it that way. That's a lazy technique in terms of you don't have to plant it again. But manipulating plants, whenever you've built up a store of energy in the root of a plant, you can force that. And rhubarb is the classic example, like the forced rhubarb last week. That was last year's energy stored in the root that had been pushed up into the shoot, but none of that had happened from this year's kind of nutrients or feeding. You can do that with lots of other things, especially if you lived on the continent and you had really, really cold winter where the frost or the permafrost came and stayed in the soil for 3 or 4 months in the winter. And then, has everyone done a bit of either jam or chutney or made some kind of preserve? Zoe made some lovely marmalade. Enjoying that. That's okay. Yeah. Well, considering you hadn't grown the oranges, that's great. It's taking these preserving agents, and sugar is a nice one, but maybe the most luxurious in some ways. But all the other ones: alcohol, vinegar, salt, oil, or by smoking, or just by maintaining sterile conditions around things. Like, I'm thinking, there's 1 or 2 others which I haven't tried that much, which is things like bottling and canning, where if you heat up, say, French beans in a jar or a can to the right temperature, and then seal it so the air doesn't get in, they will actually store. But if it's salted as well, then you've got an extra guarantee that if any bugs get in, they're not going to multiply in that. So there's those kind of ways of preserving things, and then there's other techniques like, I'm thinking of sauerkraut. Sauerkraut is a lactose fermentation of cabbage. So it's a bit related to kind of what makes cheese, but you'd introduce the right microbes that then digest the cabbage and actually start to ferment it, and you stop that fermentation at the right stage, and you've got sauerkraut, which will then preserve for a longer time. Any ideas on sauerkraut? I don't know. But in terms of, if you want your vitamins in the winter, and you haven't got the option, the climate's too cold for picking greens in the winter, then if you've got some sauerkraut, at least you're going to get some basic vitamin C and things and stay alive, that kind of thing. So fermentation's another option. But the more that we can do without fiddling around and doing an extra process, the better. So although I do all these things preserving, my main aim is to have available as wide a range of crops for as long as possible. That's stored in the ground in the case of roots. We've just lifted some very new potatoes, except they're not new potatoes. They're the last ones of last year's that have sat in the ground all winter, and they're actually still okay in the ground. And similarly with carrots, and there's still a few parsnips left. And then, sowing and re-sowing and having a wide range of the greens, the salads going. So I was really proud when we started this course that I could provide you with any greens at all, because that was the start of February, the coldest part of the year. So that was quite an achievement at that stage, and then they've carried on and multiplied and got a lot easier. And also looking at your site, I just had a look at Serena's pictures, and it's starting to think, well, you've got a sunny spot there, so one opportunity to plant warm-loving things, but equally you've got cool and shady around the other side, which in the height of summer, that's going to be the best space for salads, rather than in the full sun. So in the full sun in the winter, but round in the shade in the summer to grow the same crop, that kind of thinking. And assessing your site and noticing specific patches. That would also relate to all your soft fruits like rhubarb and gooseberries and even blackcurrants. You can grow against a north-facing wall because they don't need any sun in the winter because they're dormant. So anything that doesn't have leaves, isn't growing in the winter, you can actually put it in a really cold position, and then when it comes alive in the spring and is in growth in the summer, the sun is right above, so even though it's shaded from the south, it'll still get enough light to produce a crop. And things like gooseberries, raspberries, but also the sour cherries, they're especially good for growing in that north-facing shady spot. And the other ways of manipulating, I've talked about in polytunnels a lot, simply because that is the most economically efficient way to get this protected microclimate, this warm growing conditions. And little scraps of plastic can look a bit ugly. It's nicer to have a greenhouse. But this is really thinking, rather than a lot of people muck about with little cloches or cut these water bottles off and put them over individual plants. But the amount of faffing or fiddling, the amount of time, if you've got to do that twice a day, put them on when it gets cold at night, take them off when it gets too hot in the day. If you add it up over the course of months, that's hours and hours of work just to keep one plant alive. So it's being realistic about what we can achieve. And other things like hotbeds, actually creating extra warmth, whether it's from natural heat by having a big manure heap and growing plants on top of natural heat, or from something like soil warming cables, or my father has a little electric heater in his greenhouse. It's a bit of indulgence, and it cost him about 200 quid on the electric this year. So it's being realistic about what you can squeeze out of your possibilities. Right. And then last bits on cropping and harvesting. So by beginning to grow, it's this change from being a consumer, and in today's modern convenience society we've all been kind of we've had it very, 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 very easy in terms of getting our food. So my mate Stephen Watts, who does Grow Sheffield and the Abundance Project, he started to think, well, he's not grown anything, but can he feed himself? And started foraging. And that meant he had to firm his diet, his gut up basically, and eat things that we don't consider food anymore. Like, he went down the Huerta and he ate the lovage raw, but it's too strong for me. So he's had to make a more extreme change to what he's prepared to accept as food. And no doubt he'll be lifting bits of wood and eating the woodlice and things like that. But yeah, we're committing to becoming a producer instead of just a consumer. And yeah, I haven't gone into a full explanation of this, but it means tracking back and in some ways reinventing all the stages that it took to get to the current convenience system with supermarkets. So, for instance, if you're into local food and you want to source all your food locally, instead of going to one single place where thousands of people have accumulated systems over years and years and decades to provide everything in that one place for you, instead of going to the supermarket, you've got to go miles and miles and miles and source and find somebody who's grown your meat, somebody who's grown your vegetables, somebody who's grown your salad, somebody who's got your eggs. And practically speaking at the moment, with hardly any producers compared to 99% of us consumers, that means you'd spend 10 or 20 or 100 times more on the petrol and the transport to go around and find all your things compared to going to the supermarket and it's all there served up on a plate in the way that they want it. So it's a really extreme choice. All we can hope to do, really, practically speaking, is reduce our dependency on the mainstream system and gradually, incrementally increase our level of independence. But personally speaking, it took me 5 years to get started and 10 years before I was in any way self-sufficient, like 20-30% self-sufficient. So it's a really big undertaking, and then it also involves a reinvention, and this is going on at the moment, of all the social arrangements that we had that made our food system work. And we've still got the remnant of what used to be called the family farm. Or at least on the Archers, they've still got a family farm. And yeah, on the Archers, in a fantastical world, they still have a farm garden where they grow some veg, as well as making profit from their cattle or cash crops or whatever. But that is not the norm, and most farms, they'll go to the supermarket. So even for the people who are in absolutely the right position to become producers, it's much easier to make some money and go down the supermarket. So I'm just saying it's a much, much bigger challenge than society in general realises. And yeah, I'm taunting us with how difficult it would be to be 100%. But obviously what I'm saying is, if we can be 1% self-sufficient, that's better than 100% dependent. And if we can each year become 5% more self-sufficient and 5% less dependent, because we're taking into account all the other factors, the negative factors behind the established convenience system, which means exploitation of oil, exploitation of people, exploitation of resources, and basically an empirical system which, let's blame that for the present credit crunch and the problems that we're all in. That we've had it too easy, and a lot of that has also meant the competitive system means all the smaller farmers, they're not even on the market. Anybody who's got less than 100 acres, you've got no chance of being a commercial grower. And that relates to Robbie at Worlow Farm again, that they've got 20 or 100 acres over there, but commercially they're non-existent. They're never going to make enough to kind of damage the supermarket's profits. And that's my proposition, that we should actually get help from the supermarkets to grow our own, because that'll get us more interested in vegetables, and it'll never threaten their profit because we're never going to be enough of us to be good enough to actually grow as much as they've got already.
But they're quite wise, aren't they? Because they jump on that bandwagon, and in the summer they open a little tent with all the seeds and the tools and everything.
Grow for schools,
Make
yeah,
it
yeah.
healthy, don't they?
Yeah, exploiting kids.
Just
I will
to
just
get you
I will just go off in, because 3 years ago they started doing Morrison's, and you could give money to your school and they'd start growing projects, which meant they'd spend money at Morrison's, and they'd buy Morrison's potting compost or Morrison's seeds. But yeah, the exploitation of the goodwill involved in this sector, it's got to extreme cases. Like, I've criticised the council for exploiting children by putting happy smiley faces with a spade on, and there's another project that's just starting. And over the last 10 years, I've seen about 5,000 projects starting in Sheffield. None of them bloody carry on. So it's just the school wants a good publicity picture, whack a spade in the kid's hand, take a picture, right, grab the spade back, we're off, and that's the end of that project. Because it was just a publicity stunt. And yeah, this I'm leading up to, I saw Newsnight last week, and they were doing the diplomats, the British Council in Ecuador, and they've exploited the Ecuadorian resources and taken all their oil off them and polluted their environment and left the peasants, struggling. And their way of making it up to them was, well, they've got a little growing project for kids at the British Consul in Ecuador, and they were seriously pitching it so that all the British are helping the local peasants to grow food again. That was supposed to make up for the exploitation of resources and the empire for the last 100 years and the extortion that they've had on their country. So basically the hype is exceeding the reality by miles at the moment. So it's just keeping aware that this is the context that we're growing in. But to keep your own little, what I call monoverse. So rather than saying, well, it's cheapest. See you again, Asha. Yeah, rather than saying, I've got to be as good as the supermarket to be a grower, or I've got to be that scale, nobody's ever going to get in on that game. To create your own monoverse in terms of, if it's got value to you, here's my onion, it's my last one left. I'm not going to eat it yet. I might even grow it for seed, but no, I'm going to have half of it one day and half of it the next, when I'm really desperate for it. But yeah, that onion has a value that it's the basis of a couple of meals, or part of a couple of meals to me. And I'm not pricing it up, and I'm not charging myself for using that onion. It's my own internal economy. And it is a Bedfordshire champion, and I did save the seed to produce it myself. So it's part of me in that sense, longer term. But yeah, in terms of maintaining your own value system and thinking, this is still worth it, even though I've spent an hour growing this salad or something, and if I paid someone to do it, I'd have to pay 30 quid. And it's not worth that much in the economy, but if it gives you good nutrition and a better chance of staying healthy and not needing insurance or health provision, that's got real value as well. And if it's meant that you've gone outside and breathed fresh air and even got some exercise and it's kept you healthy that way, again, adding up all the little incremental values that aren't anything to do with the economy but are to do with our personal health, well-being and lifestyle, that's been the underlying pitch. But you need to remember those things, both the negatives in terms of what we're protesting against in the mainstream system, and also all these multiple positives that we can get out of actually doing it ourselves. Because, if it was just a question of trying to save money or a money thing, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. It wouldn't be worth it. So it's the bigger human value. And for me, that is also this attempt to broaden that out. So it's not just a personal monoverse. It includes other people. So other people work with me, and clients come along and get benefit. And then my life seems worth it. And it's more satisfying if I can share with others. So the multiple benefit. If I get benefit, that's that much benefit. If somebody else gets that benefit, that's twice as much benefit. And if dozens of people are getting that benefit, it's multiples of. So it's about pure enjoyment in that sense. And then longer term, there may be a time when it does actually become economically viable. And again, that's my sense of we've got time now, while the supermarkets are still full of food, to actually prepare a plan B or a backup plan, just in case they're not always full of food into the long-term future. And I'm talking 5-10 years ahead. But my prediction would be that, yeah, and it's happened already, by the way, that certain things will get missed in the market. So certain countries will go through certain crises or something, and suddenly the price of that doubles. So the price of seaweed meal, which I've been recommending and I still recommend, has just doubled because it's an import. And if you factor in the price inflation plus the exchange rate, doubled in price. And yeah, the prediction, which has already happened, is that some things like bananas you will just not be able to find in the markets for at certain periods of the year. Now bananas, they can grow them and store them and produce them at any time of year, but they've got to process them, they've got to invest in the storage and the ripening process. And some things, for some countries, it's not worth it. So if the Chinese yuan or whatever it is eventually increases in value, they're going to sell all the bananas to the Chinese, and there's 1 billion of them, and we won't get any bananas at certain points. And that has already happened. Down the markets, you just do not see bananas for weeks on end sometimes. And that's because other people can afford to buy them from wherever they come from, and we haven't got the buying power. So that, that's true for some people who are on the dole and limited circumstances already. But as we go into the future, that's going to be the little reminders. It won't mean that anyone goes hungry in terms of there will still be something to eat. But it might be genetically modified corn, sweet corn from the States, like they've used to subsidise and bail out certain countries, but then that ends up that they don't grow anything themselves there because they're getting subsidised or food handouts from the States. And if that carries on for years, which it has done in certain countries, that means why bother farming? Because we're getting given it for free off the States. It might be crap quality, but then all the farmers have given up, and McDonald's can then move in because there's no competition. And that is, I suppose, the pinnacle of what I'm talking about, that it's not our one-person kind of protest against the dominance of one country in the whole world. But it does help, and it does give you a little kind of fight back against the Walmarts and the genetic engineers and all that. So maybe I should have said that at the start of the course, but that might have put you off. But yeah, I'm pleased with the course in terms of most of you have stuck around and kept it and kept awake and things. But for me, I've been able to combine the generic and the individual. So obviously, I'm presenting this from an individual grower's point of view. I've had lots of experience with other people and grown with lots of other people, so I've brought that in. But it's still my hallmark, my personal way of going about things. But what I'm trying to extract from that personal experience and pass on to you is the things with generic value and importance that you can take away. Some of those techniques, like soil sculpture, watering techniques, the general philosophy as well, and put into practice in your own systems on whatever scale. Most of the things that I've been trying to get over, should be relevant whether you're small scale, but they can be scaled up to be larger scale. And that combination of, I'm talking to one audience, but I've met each of you as individuals, and I've got an idea about who you are as background individuals as well. And we've made a kind of connection and a growing kind of relationship in that sense. Shall I shut up now before I blow it? No, I'll do. And I've talked for the extra 20 minutes now. So